Have a seat, and what we'll do is we'll answer a few questions from the media, and I would ask that the local reporters get first dibs here, and then we'll answer as many questions as we've got time for. So go ahead.
Alex Loroff with Spectrum News 1. Mr. Vice President, there was a poll released yesterday of Wisconsin voters where 70% of respondents said their biggest concerns right now are affordability and the cost of living.
Sure.
What can still be done at the federal level to ease some of those affordability concerns that Wisconsinites still have?
Well, look, it's our top concern, too. We want people to be able to afford a good life. Nothing breaks my heart more than the idea that you've got somebody who goes out, they bust their rear end, they come home, they want to give their kids a nice meal, maybe once or twice a year, they want to take their kids on a nice vacation. We want people to be able to afford that so long as they work hard and play by the rules. And I think the thing that we've tried to remind ourselves of in the Trump administration is we were put in a very big hole. When you talk about the average American family under Biden's leadership that lost $3,000 of take-home pay, we think every single day, how do we get that $3,000 back and then some? You heard me say earlier, and this is a true statistic, that the average American family has gained about $1,400 under the Trump administration just in about a year and a month. Now that's something we're very proud of, but we think every single day that still means that compared to when Biden took over, those Americans are still running behind. They're still catching up. So I think what we have to do every single day is come up with ideas for how to make the American people's lives better, and that's what we're doing. Some of this is the policies that we've already put in place take a little bit of time to work their way through the system. Some of it is we got to keep on working at it. You know, a few months ago, the President of the United States had the big pharmaceutical companies into the Oval Office. And normally what happens is these big pharmaceutical companies, they come to Washington, thanks to the fraud and corruption, and they get a big fat paycheck from congressional Democrats. You know what they got instead? They got a lecture from the President of the United States. Why is it that the people in this room, for my entire life and then some, paid the highest prescription drug prices in the world, while people in England or France or other rich countries paid much lower prices? And the reason is because the pharmaceutical companies took advantage of us. That was corrupt. It was unacceptable. Now, you're already starting to see this with certain medications, and you're going to see it with more, but the President of the United States said, we are done paying more than Europe for prescription drugs. We want to pay what they pay, and if you're not going to take that deal, then get the hell out of my office. Well, they took that deal. So we got to keep working at it, but I'd say to Wisconsin voters, whether they're conservative or liberal or in the middle, I'd say to them, ask yourselves what kind of a hole the Joe Biden era put us in, and do you want to give power back to the people who created those problems, or do you want to double down on the administration that has busted our tails for the last year to fix those problems? Let's double down on the leadership that's fixing the problems, not the leadership that created them.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Matt Smith from WISN TV in Milwaukee. On the fraud efforts and what we saw in Minnesota yesterday, here in Wisconsin, the governor has refused to give over the SNAP data here in the state, along with the voter data. I'm curious, is there a point, or at what point would the administration withhold federal funds from Wisconsin?
Well, look, we're going to look at every option that we have because we've got to stop this terrible fraud, but that is absurd. Ask yourself a question. Why would the government of Wisconsin not want to help us kick fraud off of the welfare rolls and kick fraud off of the voter rolls? And the only answer I can possibly come up with is because they like to cheat. There's no other real explanation. Now, the governor might say, in fact, I'm sure the governor would say this, let me just be charitable to those who disagree with us. The governor would say, well, there isn't as much fraud as the Trump administration believes there is. Well, even if that's true, and it's not, but even if that's true, let's get what fraud there is off the voter rolls and off the welfare rolls. You know the right number of people who should be illegally voting in American elections? 0. You know the number of people who should be fraudulently collecting food stamps? 0. I want those benefits to exist for the people who need them. The only way to promise that is to get the fraud out of the system, and that's what we're trying to do in the Trump administration. No more fraud, no more corruption. It shouldn't be hard.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ellie Davis, Local 5 News. What should data centers do to be good community partners?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And you saw the president talk about this in the State of the Union address. Look, there's a good news and a bad news with data centers. Now, the good news is, first of all, they're big facilities. You create a lot of construction jobs. And this next generation of the technological revolution, you need those data centers to make that run. Those data centers are like the gasoline of the technology revolution that we're going to see over the next 75 years. And I don't know about you all, but I want America to win that technology revolution. I don't want China or some other country to win it. And so that's why we got to have these things. Now, here's the downside. If those centers are built and the local governments aren't ensuring that there's enough power for those data centers, then it's going to increase electricity costs for everybody else. And so what we think the data centers have got to do is they've got to work with the local governments, with the state governments, and in the federal government, we are trying to do everything that we can so that if you build a data center, for example, you can just build a power plant right next door. What I think we ought to be working towards is you build those data centers and electricity costs come down for American citizens instead of going up for American citizens. The data centers can afford it. We got to make sure that they're good neighbors so that when they come in and build these great buildings, the people in their neighborhood, the people in their community benefit too, and that's through lower power. That's the best way they can be good neighbors. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Laura Schulte. I'm a reporter with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And in Wisconsin, rural hospitals are struggling. Closures are creating healthcare deserts for parts of the state. And what can be done federally to keep those hospitals open and providing necessary care to community members?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's a very, very serious problem. And unfortunately, this, like so much of what's going on in our country right now, is a problem that we inherited from the last administration. If you look at the number of rural hospital closures that were happening in 2022 and 2023 and 2024, it was really accelerating. And it's one of the reasons why it's not a provision that's talked about as much, but if you look in the big, beautiful bill, the working families tax cut, however you're calling it, in that legislation, there is a multi-billion-dollar rural hospital fund to try to help these rural hospitals persevere in tough times, stay open, provide essential services, and get them to a place where they're on firmer financial footing. Nothing like that, I don't believe, Derek, had ever existed in the federal government before, but we said, look, we cannot let these rural hospitals just disappear, so we've created this fund to try to, support the ones that can stay open and try to slow the closures for the ones that are going to have to close. We think that we're starting to see some good evidence from those. It takes a little bit of time for that tens of billions of dollars to work its way through the system, but that's the number one thing. And then the number two thing is the Trump administration did a number of things in the first term, and we're trying to do this in the second term to give patients more choice. Because what we often do in our healthcare system, like for example, if you're a veteran, under the Biden administration, we would force veterans to drive an hour and a half away to a big city hospital when they could maybe go to a telehealth appointment in their own home, or maybe drive 15 minutes down the road to the local doctor. So we've tried to empower people to have more choice, because if they have more choice, they're going to be able to stay in their communities, which means more money going to those rural healthcare organizations. And that's the way that we save rural healthcare too. It's a tough problem. I'm not going to pretend it's easy, but we are working as hard as we can to make sure that the people in our rural communities still have access to great healthcare. Thank you.
Stephanie Hoff with the Midwest Farm Report Radio Network, talking to farmers across the state of Wisconsin. My question for you today is, commodity markets have not been friendly to Wisconsin farmers. I'm talking corn, soybeans, and dairy. What is the administration doing to bolster trade, increase export markets, and those relationships to bring market prices back up?
Yeah, so the good news on that is that our great Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke, has been on this from the very beginning. I think it was maybe the first cabinet meeting where Brooke comes up to me and says, JD, the farmers have inherited a mess, and we've got to do everything that we can to ensure that they can stay afloat during this very tough time. So one of the things that we're doing is making sure that wherever commodity prices are, that our farmers can do their job, they can provide their food, and if they fall on tough times, there's a little bit of a support mechanism there. Now you might say, why do we do that? But the answer is actually very simple. If we don't have American sovereignty in our food supply, we don't have sovereignty at all. If you cannot depend on your neighbors to provide your food, if the food that you're relying on comes from another country, say goodbye to sovereignty, because that country is the one that controls you. The country that controls the food is the country that will ultimately control the entire world. So we've made very strong efforts, and we're going to keep on working at this with our farmers to ensure that whatever commodity prices are, they're able to stay afloat, they're able to grow their products. We know that they're struggling, and we're trying hard to fix that. The other thing the president has done is, for a very long time, China, one of the biggest buyers of soybeans, they would take advantage of American markets, but they would not take the product of Wisconsin farmers, whether it's corn or soybean or whatever it is, they would not offload that product into their country. Now, that was a fundamental unfairness, and that's why the president is fighting back and making sure that we have fair trade practices. If you don't have countries honoring the United States of America, our great farmers and our great manufacturers, if you have countries that are able to come in and undercut the wages of our workers, but we're not able to export their product, ladies and gentlemen, that is not trade, that is international fraud, and that's what's been happening far too long all over the world. The President of the United States is stopping it. We're going to keep on stopping it to the benefit, not just of Wisconsin farmers, but Wisconsin manufacturers too. So let's say we'll take 2 more questions here. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Dylan Eckhart, 9 News, out of Wausau, WAOW. Nationally, there has been bipartisan legislation introduced sticking with agriculture. For example, the Domestic Organic Investment Act, which would make a USDA's development grant permanent, allowing for grants for farmers and businesses. How will the administration continue to work with local farmers and businesses in Wisconsin, especially central Wisconsin, to expand on some of those ideas and introduce legislation?
Well, you heard a little bit of my answer in the last question, but you're right that there's a lot of legislation that's working through the Congress, and as broken as Congress is as an institution sometimes, there are still some good pieces of bipartisan legislation that happen. Luckily, I think agriculture is one of those areas where you still have some good bipartisan pieces of legislation. You ask how we're going to work with local farmers, especially in central Wisconsin, and the answer is just to listen. You know, we've got a great legislative team at the White House, but we've also got a lot of great allies like Derek Van Orden in Congress. And what these guys are doing is they're coming to us with ideas. And they're saying, look, we heard from our constituents, this is something we've got to do. You know, whatever the product is, you know, sometimes they're most concerned about commodity prices. They're worried that the soybeans and the corn, it's way too low. Sometimes they're worried, of course, about inputs. They're worried about fertilizer. They're worried about the cost of fuel. So what we just try to do is work with our allies in Congress, and frankly, we'll work with anybody in Congress who has good ideas about how to help our farmers. We're going to have some good legislation on this front over the next year. It's just a question of getting it over the hill, getting it to the president's signature, or to the president's desk, I should say, for his signature. Thank you. One more question.
Thank you, Vice President. Derek Tritz, Newswatch 12, and Ryan Lander. Wanted to ask about the healthcare worker shortages in several hospitals. Hospitals in Wisconsin are experiencing or are worried about the aging demographic shift, and I'm wondering what the administration will do to bolster the healthcare workforce in the coming years.
Yeah, a couple things that we see is one, you know, we're encouraging hospitals and all healthcare providers, and we're seeing some evidence of this, to use technology to your advantage, right? So if you've got, let's say, a guy who needs to see a doctor, but he can see that doctor from the comfort of his own home, doing a telehealth appointment, you know, sometimes you got to go into the doctor. Sometimes you can actually do that by just talking to the doctor at home. That we're trying to encourage because that puts less stress on some of the healthcare workers. If you can just see somebody quickly, it's in and out, you don't have to deal with all the paperwork of coming in for a doctor's visit. That's one of the ways that you relieve that stress and shortage that we see in our healthcare workforce. The other thing is that we're investing a lot to try to make sure that we meet the doctor, the nurse, the physician assistant shortage. The basic problem that we had in our country is that for a long time, we would encourage people to get like women's studies degrees in the United States of America, which, you know, maybe you need a few of those. I'm not sure how much, but what you really need is doctors. You need nurses. You You need people who can work with their hands. You need people who can work on a farm. You need people who build and make things and take care of people. And our education system just really underinvested in training the next generation of healthcare workers. That's not a problem that's going to be solved overnight, but it is something we're working to solve because we want, I mean, you know, I see kids in the audience. I'm sure everybody has a young person who wants to be a healthcare worker, or knows somebody in your family or your friendship circle that wants to work in healthcare. We got to make it easier for our young people to choose those careers. Unfortunately, for a very long time, we've actually made it harder for people to go into the healthcare field. We layer up those who do with debt, and we make it harder for them to join the workforce. We're trying to make it easier for people to enter the healthcare field, and in doing that, that's how you release the long-term shortage. So, that's all I have. I appreciate everybody who asked a question. I'm sorry if you didn't get time to ask a question, but let me just leave you with this one final thought. So I've got 3 little kids at home, and I've got one on the way. I've got an 8-year-old, I've got a 6-year-old, I've got a 4-year-old, and Usha is pregnant with baby number 4, which we're very happy about, very proud of. Thank you. But my 8-year-old, you know, he's gotten really into football in the last probably 3 or 4 months. Don't hold it against him. He's an Ohio State fan. That's his dad rubbing off on him. Are we Wisconsin fans here in central Wisconsin? Okay. But here's the thing. We watched over the past few days. We watched Rudy. Does everybody remember the movie Rudy? About this guy, he was too little, he wasn't fast enough, he was 5'6", but he worked his tail end off and he made the Notre Dame football team at really the height of Notre Dame's power. I mean, they were one of the best, they still are, but they really were one of the best football programs back in the country. And it really is just this incredible tale of a guy who believed in his dreams, who fought for those dreams and would never give up. A classic American tale. But I was watching that movie and I realized the 3 most important people in that movie, obviously one is Rudy, the guy who became the football player. But number 2 is Rudy's dad, and number 3 is the priest. There's a priest in the movie who sort of serves as a spiritual counselor to Rudy. And it kind of hit me watching this movie that the American dream takes many shapes and sizes. I think all of us know that. Even among our own kids, our grandkids, our friends and family, you've got the striver. You've got the guy like Rudy who's got really big dreams, wants to play football for Notre Dame and is going to make those big dreams happen. But you've also got a guy like Rudy's dad, a guy who just wanted to work a good job, who wanted dignified work, who wanted to raise his family and take a nice vacation every now and then. And then you had this priest who was kind of the glue that held everything together, that helped people when they were struggling, that provided counsel to people when they were down on their luck, and was empowered to be a leader in the community. And I realized watching this that when we talk about the American dream, I'm not talking about my American dream. I'm talking about your American dream. Whether you want to have a good job and raise a healthy, happy family, whether your kid wants to go off and play college football, whether you want to start a business like the one that we're standing in, whatever it is, the great thing about this country is that the American dream comes in many shapes and sizes. But here's the thing about the American dream. The government cannot give it to you for you. But the government, with bad policy and bad leadership, it can destroy that American dream, whatever shape it takes in the lives of you and your children. And so I just want you to know that I'll never forget where I came from. Raised in a poor family, raised by a grandmother who would sometimes struggle to pay her prescription drugs or put food on the table and had to pick one or the other. And here I am before you, the greatest crowd in the world as the vice president of the greatest country in the world. This country is still a place of very big dreams. But I'm not going to pretend that my dream is your dream, and I just want you to know that every single day I go to work, and every single day Donald J. Trump goes to work, and we fight for the American dream for you and your family, however you define it. We would really appreciate you not sending us a bunch of crazy Democrats in November, so please don't do that. God bless you all. Thank you.